Welcome to Building Web Apps that Integrate with your portal. My name is Bjorn Svensson. I'm the lead product engineer for the JavaScript API. And with me today,
I'm getting feedback. I'm Heather Gonzago, and I'm not the lead, but I am a product engineer for the JavaScript API.
All right, here's the door. Today, we're going to talk about these topics. And the slide deck is available online at the URL you see on the screen, if you can read the small font in the URL browser. We're going to start talking about ArcGIS Online and Portal. Just a really quick overview to see how it fits into this session about applications and JavaScript API. We're going to talk a little more in detail about the web maps and the web scenes, both how they work on the platform and also the specification itself. A lot of our demos are going to be on how to use ArcGIS Online content inside a JavaScript application. That's sort of the main piece of the presentation. And that includes working with secured items that you share to a group or just to certain people. Why would you want to use the ArcGIS Online or Portal when you build your web apps? You don't have to, but there are a lot of benefits to it. Some of the easy things when you have it is that you can share and manage those secure resources very easily. You don't have to maintain your username and passwords. You can use ArcGIS Online and Portal and do that in one place for all your apps and all your data. Having data in one central place is very beneficial. Don't worry. We have a backup plan. That just threw me off a little bit, but yes. Some of the other benefits is that when you have your data on ArcGIS Online, it's in one central place. You can easily update it, you can organize it, and it's easy to find it using tags and groups and sharing. If we start looking at this slide from the bottom, we can see how you have ArcGIS Online and you have Portal. And for the purpose of this presentation, it doesn't really matter which one you have. On top of that, you have some things. These can be web maps, web scenes, or groups and items. On the top of that layer, we have the actual applications. These can be runtime applications. They can be ArcGIS Pro. It can be ArcGIS Online Web Map Viewer, or it can be one of the templates or Web App Builder, or it can be a JavaScript application that you wrote yourself. Most of the time, these will connect to your web maps or your web scenes. When it comes to having your applications, you probably want to start with some sort of content, your data. The data can be in different formats. When we talk about web map and web scenes, web map is our 2D container for a map document, and web scene is our 3D container for a map document. And when I talk about map document, basically what I mean is that it has the layers you want to have, it has the visualization you want to have, and it has the symbology and pop-ups. So those building blocks, part of your content, it makes part of the web map and the web scene. The other aspect of different types of items you can have on ArcGIS Online that are useful for. All right, over to the next computer. Commercial break. All right, no more switching back and forth. That saves up some time. Can we show the slide deck? Sorry. Content is really important. We have a whole slide for it. Oh.
Keep the URL up so everybody can see that. Sorry. Technology.
You don't have touchscreen, right?
No, I don't.
But you have battery. That's a lot better, I guess. This one.
You want to go back here? Okay.
Yeah.
Don't do that, Heather. All right.
All right.
There we go.
Groups and items are important. That's where we were. We're going to talk most in this session about the ArcGIS JavaScript API version 4, but most of it applies to version 3 as well. And when there's a difference, we'll spell that out in more detail. Web maps. We talked about how web map is the most important things. Click. How many people here have used ArcGIS Online? I want to see every hand. All right. Who has not used ArcGIS Online? All right, that's okay. We'll get you there. Or ArcGIS Portal, you're probably familiar with the map viewer. The map viewer is the most, for many people, it's a central component of the ArcGIS Online. That's where you add your layers, either whether you have them hosted on ArcGIS Online or if you have them on your own servers, or if you've uploaded data as part of little CSV files and so on. In the web map, we can see that we have a bunch of layers, and we can look in our contents. And you see you have a base map. You can switch the base maps using the base map gallery. You have, and it doesn't matter if you're in the map viewer or if you're in one of our other applications, this thing, because it's a web map, those things stay the same. And actually the way it works is the base maps themselves is a group on ArcGIS Online. And so if you log in for a different organization, you'll see potentially a different list of base maps. So again, those different items that we have on ArcGIS Online becomes important pieces for your application. Click. Yep. So 2D is good. I've worked with 2D maps for a long time. And a few years ago, I started playing with 3D. And it's, in the beginning, it's sort of just cool and handy. But it actually turns out it can be useful as well. And not just when it comes to visualization. In this case, we're looking at Harvard. I never went there myself, but we can pretend. And we can navigate a little bit in 3D space. We can see how it makes it easier to see, and you can rotate the map. We can also go to our... Show some shades. Yeah. No, the sunshine.
Okay, sorry.
Another thing that makes more sense in 3D when you can rotate the map and see the more realistic thing is to show the time of the day, the shadow of the buildings. These sort of things becomes much more visible and easier to interpret in the 3D things. So those are our web scenes. Most of the times the web map and the web scene has the same data, but there's some data specific for 3D. What they have in common though is the ID or the unique identifier. It's sort of like a UPC code, a scan code, or the credit card. They all have a unique identifier. And just like your credit card doesn't matter if you have a Visa or a MasterCard, they're all unique. And the same things with web map or web scenes, they are unique. And you take this ID, and you can see here in the URL, if we go back to the app that we had, and you had it in the tab, right? And here we can highlight and see how it says web scene equal. This is the ID that we have. And this becomes key for most of the rest of our presentation. So the web map ID and the web scene ID. All right. And that's the unique identifier. So what is a web map and web scene? How is it represented? We talked about sort of what's in it, but not how it's stored. The way it's stored is using JSON. And if you look on the right side, you can see there's some metadata about my web map. And on the right side, you can see it's actually all the data, what layers I have, and how to symbolize it. So when we talk about the web map, behind the scenes, it's really two different documents. There's the metadata, and there's the meat of the data. If we click on the metadata link there, yep. We're going to go to the map viewer, and is everybody here familiar with using the console in Chrome browser? Developers? Developer conference? Yeah.
If you're not, I have a session tomorrow afternoon.
Speaker.
Developing. And my colleague Kelly Hutchins and I, we discuss it in pretty good detail. If you want to stick around on a Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock. So.
And tricks in JavaScript API.
Yeah, a little shameless plug.
All right. Heather, do you want to show us a little bit on how we can see the JSON for both the metadata and for the main data?
Getting feedback on this. Over there. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to take a quick look here. I have my network traffic open. I'm going to grab this ID of this web map. So this is that Chicago Metro web map that we were initially looking at. And what you can see here is it's making two calls. This first call is to that metadata that we saw. So just like basic content like the ID, the owner, the org ID, and so forth. But the one that you're probably going to be most interested in is the data. So this is going to be the meat of your web map. All of this is the operational layers. This is big fat JSON that it comes across, and this is what it actually gets read. So this is kind of ugly. You may or may not want to work with it here. Personally, I don't particularly care for trying to read my JSON through the response within DevTools. So what I do is we have this really nifty little tool called the Geo Assistant. Is this new to anybody or not new, or hands? Yes, no. Has anybody seen the Geo Assistant before? Awesome, good. For those of you who have not, take note, because it is really very, very useful. So basically, I'm going to log in. And as a side note, I'm actually working with the portal security framework, OAuth here, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. Log in with my credentials, and I'm going to search for that specific web map ID. I can see the Chicago Metro Transit map. I'm going to view that item's JSON. And as you can see here, I can actually go on down and I can see the content, so that metadata. I don't know if this is probably kind of small. Let me make that a little bigger for you. And you can also see the actual data as well. And for those of you who may like to just kind of monkey with this stuff, I do it sometimes just to see how much I can break it, or what type of cool things I can add and play around with it. You can actually go on in here and edit the data and save it on out as well, and reload it and see what changes might take effect within whatever, if you're using Pro, or if you're using, in this case, in our case, we're using the map viewer online.
So if you want to monkey around with this, how do you know what to type in?
Very good segue. Oh, I like that. That's good. So what I wanted to show you as well was we have some documentation. They touched upon it, and you guys may have actually seen it in some other sessions. I know they talked about in the plenary. This was something that has been an enormous work in progress. I started working on this a couple years ago, and it still needs a lot of love. But wanted to show you the web map spec. So if we go on in here, and I'm just going to show you directly from developer's site. If you go to the developers.arcgis.com, documentation, and then scroll on down to platform technology, you're going to see we have a spec for both 2D and 3D. Click on this web map spec, and you can see pretty much every single object that you can access and work with within the web map. Okay, what properties you can use within these objects, limitations. Some of them, there's current limitations. Maybe you can only use it, like in Pro or whatever maybe, but that should all be in there. Again, it's just a nice little useful utility. It may not be needed for everybody, but just take note it is there if so.
So do I need to know about the web map specification to be able to create web applications?
No, you do not. You do not.
Nice.
Alrighty. Okay, your turn. Be close and down.
All right. Seems like my mic works better over here.
It's the internet.
Is that one? All right. But I need to see the thing. How many people here write JavaScript code? Almost everybody. That's good. So you guys are familiar with what you see on the screen? No, I need a hands up. It's a test. All right, less people. The key thing here is that what version of the API are we using here? Who can tell me? Exactly. So if you haven't used with 4x, then you haven't seen this. It's very similar. It's pretty straightforward. The key things we want to point out in this little code snippet here is that you load your classes just like normal, and when you want to work with a web map, you have a class called web map. And matching for if you work for web scene, you have a class called web scene. The other part is here that you look at the ID, and this is the ID we're talking about, the web map ID or the web scene ID. So the things you either get from your URL or you can get it in programmatically. But that's the same ID that we keep talking about, and that's a very important thing to remember. Click. One of the differences between the 3x and the 4x version of the JavaScript API is this slide. In the 4x, you can work with individual layer items. So in ArcGIS Online, not only can you store web maps and web scenes, you can also store specific layers. You might have seen that when you're in the map viewer in ArcGIS Online, and you click on it and it says Save Layer. That saves a layer with the items and the configuration that you've made in that map viewer, in that web map. When you have that layer, you can use that by itself. So it has just the pop-ups and the symbolization you created specifically for that. And that's in the 4x, you can load that. And it's really easy, isn't it, Heather?
It is.
How easy is it?
All right. Oh, sorry, guys.
Oh, turn mine off.
Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple demos here. This might be old hat for some of you guys, and for some of you, hopefully it's brand new and you can learn a couple new things. So if we go into, I've got a couple demos here. What I have here is I've created just a very, very basic web map, which I've shared out. Go ahead and click on this. Is that Chicago one that we showed earlier. So it looks very, very similar to what we saw earlier, right, within the map viewer. So if we take a look here at the code, you'll see what Bjorn was talking about earlier. We've got our web map class. The web map class also has a portal item property. Is there anything that you guys might notice here? Looks, if you're familiar or used to maybe writing in 3, there's this portal item up here, but do you see it anywhere listed up here? No. The reason we don't have to require this is because we have this thing called auto casting. Basically what happens is that when you create this class, when you instantiate this class, this web map class, and you pass this portal item property in, it's smart enough to know, it says, hey, I know that this portal item is off of the portal item class itself. So you don't need to go in there and actually require it, create a new portal item instance and set everything. You could if you wanted to, but you don't have to. So how do you know whether or not if something actually has, it's auto-castable? That's an actual word. If we take a look at the API reference, go to web map, and take a look at the properties of that web map, you'll see the portal item. You'll notice here we have this auto cast little indicator right next to it. That's going to tell you you don't need to go in there and explicitly set everything beforehand. If you click on that, we're not going to go into a whole bunch of detail, but there is some additional information in our guide topic that talks about it and can give you a little bit more information on what that's all about. All right. So what you may want to notice here is back into that application, if you click on maybe one of my train stops, there's not a whole lot of information in it, but it's got a little bit. I have some pop-ups that I configured within that web map back using the map viewer. Saved the pop-up within the web map. In addition to that, all this rendering, right? So this code, what you see here, there's no pop-up information. There's no rendering happening. It's all coming on over for you, which is awesome because if anybody's actually ever created an application from scratch and has ever worked with like unique value renderers, and there's a whole lot within that web map. If you actually opened up that the web map JSON and you took a look at all of it, it's pretty big. That would require a lot of lines of code. So we stripped all of that out of the equation, and now you can access everything automatically just by referencing that portal item. Alrighty. So one thing I want to show is if we go in, close some things down so I don't get lost in all my tabs. If we go in here to that this Chicago Metro Transit map, I'm just going to go in. I'd like to change the renderer. I don't know. Or actually, let's change out Let's change out the base map maybe. Oh, streets. Okay. We're going to save this. I may need to open it up in a different window because it may be cached out. We'll try it though, just to see. No. Awesome. So did you just notice this? I didn't have to change any code. It's all done for you. So I didn't have to add or change any base map layers within the code itself. Everything gets automatically picked up within the web application because it's saved out within that web map. Okay. Let's say I've got some functionality in this web map. These are very, very basic. Usually you're going to have a little bit more written into it. But let's say you want to work with, I don't know, you've got some other web map that you need to pass in instead. Instead of having to rewrite the whole thing, what you could do is just go back in. I remember where I kept it. And I had it open. You doing okay with time? Awesome. Okay. So what we have here is if we go to that, that load web map, save that out. Let's try this again. We got Palm Springs. All right, so different web map. Same application, just different web map. All right, we have a shared web scene. Same exact concept. Basically, you go in. Instead of using the web map, you're using the web scene and passing that portal item in. And then lastly, we have this create a layer from a portal item. Right, so in this particular case, a little bit different. Instead of calling a new web map class, I'm actually using the layer class and I'm calling this from portal item method off of that. And then I pass in that portal item of that saved, that feature layer, that hosted feature layer. Okay. Again, everything that I have saved within that layer gets brought on over. So, you know, in this case, it's the blue line at O'Hare. All right, my pop-up information comes over. My rendering. Again, it just makes things a little bit more efficient for those of you who may not want to go in and write a whole bunch of code. All right, back to Bjorn. I'm just going to open up the doc for it.
How many people here are familiar with the Portal API? It can be confusing. That's about more than half. That's good. Portal API has a few different names. Sometimes we talk about the REST or the sharing API. And there's a documentation for this, which you can see on the screen. When the JavaScript API is connecting to the server or connecting to ArcGIS Online, what it really is doing is making a REST request to the REST endpoint of the sharing API. There are times when you might want to know about the sharing API so that you can do it your own way if you don't like what's happening in the JavaScript API, or if there's some specific feature you want to take advantage of that's not available in the API. So it's a quite useful thing to know. Same thing sometimes if you're trying to work with the classes in the JavaScript API and you don't know exactly how to use them. Sometimes the sharing API has more examples or specific examples for maybe could be useful for what you're trying to do. In the JavaScript API, all right, so the Portal API is important to know about, but you don't have to know anything about it. The JavaScript API wraps them all up for you nicely, and you should only use the things in those that we think you should know about, and those are well documented. So on the slide that you just saw, it was listed a number of classes. Here's just an example of one class in our API reference, the portal item. The portal item is basically the class in the JavaScript API that connects to one single item in Portal or ArcGIS Online. And it has all the metadata and the data you can get from there. Click. All right, time for a demo.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to show you a couple samples here First one, I'm going to show you working with the portal API within a JavaScript application. You don't have to use JavaScript. You can use Python, Perl, PHP. There's a bunch you can work with. I know JavaScript, so I'm going to show you in this particular case, we're going to work with Esri request and using those portal REST API calls. So let's go back in here and close some things down. All right. All right, so I have a very beautiful app, as you can see, that's highly descriptive, but basically I want to show you the underlying functionality behind all of this. So I have just one single button, get items, but what it's actually doing is it's calling this search call directly off of the portal API. If we take a look at this, if anybody can't see it, please let me know. I know it's kind of hard with these dev tools. If you take a look at this, you can see all this header information that gets sent through. This is the one that you really want to take note of. And this is the stuff that actually is documented. Well, Bjorn just showed you earlier with the portal API REST documentation. All of the query, like the parameters that you would pass in, that's all documented there. So in this case, all I'm doing is I'm passing in a query owner of Heather_JS9, which is me. So if we take a look at the actual code, the important part of all of this is right here. All right. So I'm just calling this get content. I'm passing in the URL for that search call, the query, the owner, which is me, the response type, so I want it to return it as a JSON format. And then I'm calling Esri request, so this method, passing in that URL and then these options. If everything is cool and it can find it, and can bring it on back, it's going to go ahead, bring that response back as JSON, which I basically parsed and then brought that up as a list, just a linkable list. Right, so that's fine and dandy and all, but you probably don't want to go through all that rigmarole. So what we have done was what Bjorn showed you is that we've taken a lot of that functionality in that portal API and we've encompassed or made convenience classes for you. So I've taken this same functionality in this app and I'm just using one of our classes for that. So in this particular case, I'm using the portal query params. Oops, not yet, ahead of myself. Call is get items. You can see here, I'm still calling search. If we take a look at the header information, I passed a couple other things in there as well. But basically, the owner of me, Heather_JS9. So I'm searching everything there that I own. If we take a look at the actual source, a couple additional things that we've added. We have a reference to portal and a reference to portal query params. On this get content, I'm creating a new instance of portal, and by default, it's just going to go to arcgis.com. It's going to load that. If everything's cool, once it gets finished loading, it's going to create this new portal query params. I'm going to pass in the query for me, so a sort field, sort order, and so forth. Call query items off of the portal, and then pass in that query params that I just created up here. Okay. Again, if everything is cool, it can find it. It brings back that JSON. I parse that JSON and spit it out here in a listing. Okay. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to show on that. I don't think so. I think that's good. All righty. Okay, yeah, have at it.
So far, we talked mostly about using public content. There hasn't been much of a logging scenarios. It'd be great if every data was free and we shared everything and we had no secrets between us. But in reality, sometimes we have some secure data that we don't want to share with everybody. Now there's the one aspect of this is just having the secure content, and the other part is being able to access that. Now using the API, it becomes a lot easier to do both of those parts. One of the aspects of accessing secure content, or the way how the API works, is that when the application tries to access your web map or your layer, it tries to connect to it. It doesn't know if it's secure or private or public. So if it fails, it gets back a response saying that it needs to log in. And then what the API does, it tries to authenticate. And depending on how you set up your application, it either tries to use a simple, what we call the identity manager. If you used the API before, it's sort of the username and password, small, easy sign up little logo thing. Or if you're using the provided OAuth framework, you'll get a bigger pop-up, and it shows if people already logged in, they can just say they approve it, or it shows the authentication for the organization and also how to log into that. Now, there are many benefits of using the platform security model, but specifically from the JavaScript API, I think, and the OAuth aspect, really that became the key things of that. Being able to support enterprise logins, so instead of having to create a username and password for every application you have, you use one big system. You can hook it up to your own, whether you use online or portal. Either way, you can hook it up to your own existing security model and enterprise logins. The other thing is, if you have a service or an application that keeps connecting to many layers that has the same access rights, it tries to do those. So the first time when it hits a private data, it prompts for username and password or OAuth login. The next time it tries to connect to the same endpoint, it tries to reuse that. If that also fails, then we'll connect again and prompt you for that second layer. But in general, it just takes care and handle of those using the same security model. Another nice little nice benefit of having the OAuth model and the app ID that we're going to talk about soon is that you can keep track of how many people have been using your applications. And that's all provided by the platform. And the third point I want to make is that there are a number of services on ArcGIS Online that requires credits or logins, and this all becomes automatic if you use the platform security model. That can be anything from using routing and batch geocoding to using analysis to do a little more specific applications.
Thank you.
So how do you access that private data?
Okay, so I've created a couple demos here. If I can get, there we go. Create a couple demos here, pretty straightforward, but what I want to show you is the very first one. We see this, there's different scenarios. You might have a web map that's shared out, but you don't have data. Your data's not. You might have certain layers in it that require logins. You may have everything's locked down within your web map. You might have an ArcGIS, just straight old school ArcGIS server service that you have that requires credentials. So just the old token-based authentication. You can add those layers in and require your users to go in and provide their credentials as well. So you can do all of that working with these classes in your application. So the first one here, all right, so you can see here, it's kind of dark, but it actually is loading the base map. So it's loading my web map underneath it. It's just not actually getting the layer itself. And the reason for that is because I did not share that out. So one thing, probably should have opened up the dev tools beforehand. I'm gonna reload that. All righty. And it's a lot of info, so there we go. Don't want to get too far ahead here. Okay, so what we have here is when it's querying, it's going through and it's loading up all of the data. If it cannot access it, it's going to generate a response, this error code, the code 403. You don't have permissions to it. So it's smart enough, our API is smart enough to know, hey, you get this, if you see this error message, you need to go ahead and automatically prompt this application with the identity manager. All right, so go in here, reload that, pass in my credentials, and I bet you I didn't type that right because I'm doing a demo. It's always the case. And of course, I just updated it, so I've got this huge, long, you know, I've got 20 million characters. And so as you can see here, I have my secured layer. And again, it's just bringing over all of that additional information that I had saved within it. Okay, if we look at the actual code, what you should see here is there's absolutely nothing different. I've got no reference to the identity manager. I've got nothing reference for the working with OAuth. It knows automatically by recognizing that error code that, hey, we need to go in prompt for that identity for someone to log in. All right, so that's one. I can also go in here, just straight old private web map. Nothing's going to show up. And again, just like before, prompts me, and now I can bring everything on in. All right, if we looked at the code, again, it's identical with a different ID. All right, let's close some of these tabs down so we don't get lost in all of this. All righty. All right, so this one, we're going to access a public map that has a secured ArcGIS server service. We have sample server 6, which if you guys have been around long enough, you probably have seen samples. You may have worked with it as well. It's just a sample server that we have hosted that we use for samples and for playing around and testing things out. We actually have an open login for, you know, you guys if you want to play with some stuff. So we have user one. Pretty straightforward. There's a few, we have a few services in there that are secured. So in this case, I am accessing one of those in this application. And you can see here, looks a little bit different, right? Because it's token-based authentication that we're using on ArcGIS server. Please sign in to access this item. So in this case, it's user one. And I've got this really, I don't even know what that is. It's wildfires, I think. So bringing in my wildfire data. And again, if we look at that code, it's just referencing that portal item. The web map has that layer saved within it. And when I created that web map and I added that layer, when I saved it, it actually asked me, when I brought the layer in, do you want to save this layer with the credentials? We recognize that it's secured. I said, no, I want my user to have to go in and log in for those. I would have been able, there is a way you can actually go in ArcGIS Online or Portal and do what I just did. But if you don't want your users to have to log in, when it prompts you, just say, yes, I want you to save the credentials, put the credentials in, save it out, and you're good. You don't have to worry about it. And I got ahead of myself and shut that down, and I knew I shouldn't have. All right. Actually, I'm going to do something different here. Sorry, guys. I want to make sure that, because I got to do something on that needs to be on the machine and not directly in not directly on GitHub. Okay. All right. So all of what I just showed you is fine and all if you want to have your web application, the client have to worry and you have to write in, you know, working with, if you want to have the web application handle those credentials. So remember how Bjorn was saying, you know, every time you hit a secure service, whatever amount of layers you have in there, it's going to prompt you. Well, let's say you don't want to have to go through all that. You don't want your client to have to deal with the security. You want everything to be handled on the server end. That's where we would work with the OAuth, the security model. So in this particular sample, a little bit different. This is the same pop-up or dialogue that you saw when I used that Geo Assistant. It's standard across the board. What it's going to do is it's going to take the information that you have stored within your org settings. So I'm using my Esri JS API org. It's going to bring that information on in. And it's also, so in this case, there's a couple different ways of working with the OAuth sign-in. I'm using it directly within the window. I also could have used it as an actual pop-up itself. We do have samples that show you both. We had this in 3x, in the version 3x, and we also have this in 4x. So I'm going to go ahead. It remembered my name and my password, so I'm just going to sign in. And I have my web map. So the code here is slightly different. If you take a look, you'll notice that I still have the web map. I still have the portal item that I'm passing in. The difference is that I'm working with, I have the identity manager, I have a reference to OAuth Info, okay? This OAuth Info is the key component here. I create a new reference to this, and I need to pass in this app ID. Any of you who might be familiar with working with OAuth, it's not an Esri thing. This is just an open standard protocol. You can go ahead. We're not going to go into too much of the bowels of it. There's a lot of good documentation out there. The spec is out there. You can go through it to your heart's content. It's nice, light reading. The app ID is also can be considered the client ID. This is kind of like your username, all right? It's this unique identifier that we have set up specifically for this application, all right? I'm going to show you exactly how we get that in just a moment, but we're going to pass that app ID in here. I don't want it to be a pop-up window, and I'm going to then go ahead, call register OAuth info off of the identity manager, and then pass that in. Right, so now that I have this in here, when I bring this when I open this application up and it tries to access the secured web map, it's going to say, wait, hold on a second. This is secured. I get an error message when I try to open it, but wait, I see I have OAuth info. I've got this, I have this registered OAuth info that's with this. It's going to take a look at this app ID and then say, okay, I know I need to work with OAuth, and then do whatever magic it needs to do. All right, so how do we get that app ID? All right, if we go back into, am I missing anything here? Am I getting ahead of myself? No. Did you want to say anything? Nope. Okay, just making sure I was talking a lot. All right, so if we go back into, you can create this in the developer site. You can also create it in ArcGIS Online. Since we're working with ArcGIS Online, we're going to stick with it here. Now, I've already created one, but I'll go through the steps just quickly to show you exactly how I did this. So you would go in, you would add item. It's going to be an application. So we're going to create a web mapping application. I passed the URL in to this application that I am working with here. If I can find it.
Oh, I do want to say something.
Okay,
if you've been sleeping more or less through the whole presentation, this is sort of the guts of it, the app ID. So pay close attention to this
It's very dry. I realize that, and at least it's not directly after lunch. So I'm thankful for that. And you guys have had maybe some coffee.
But this is important.
It's important, and you're going to see more and more of it as time goes on. It's been around for a few years now. You're seeing more and more apps. I get a lot of questions now. More every year, UC Dev Summit, it's steadily more questions coming in regarding this. So it's important to know. So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to create this web mapping application. And then once that's in there, what you're going to need to do, this is the key component. We're going to go in and go to the settings. Within the settings, we have this app registration part. We're going to click on the register. It's a browser, and we are going to specify this redirect URI. All right, so in this case, the redirect URI is going to be my machine, okay? So it's basically saying this is the valid address that your users are allowed to be redirected to after, that the app, I should say, can be redirected to after they are successfully logged in. Okay, so I would go in and just put heather.g.esri.com, add that, register. And in this case, I only put one redirect URI. You can have multiple, doesn't matter however many. It's just, you know, who you're saying it's okay to access the application or to have it go to.
Can you make it work on my machine? Can you make it work on my machine? My machine is Bjorn. He's right. Okay.
I can. I could. If I wanted Bjorn to be able to have access to have that application redirected to his machine, I could go in here, update this item, and add him Bjorn whatever .esri.com to your machine.
All right.
So yeah.
Now I can run the app on my machine.
Yes.
All
yes,
right.
you may. So you'll see here I have this app ID and I have this app secret. Okay, this app secret. Don't worry, everything's getting deleted. Basically, the app ID, again, like I said, it can be, it's like a unique identifier. It's telling it, hey, I am registered with this application. I know that when you access this application, one of the cool things about having, I'm kind of getting a little bit ahead of myself, but one of the things that Bjorn talked about earlier was monitoring the usage of your app. And this is actually one of the key components here. So you need to have this unique identifier tied to that application. Okay, so once it knows, hey, this is the app ID, this is the application that I'm working with, this is however many users are hitting it, you know, you go in there, you can actually monitor it and you can see, you know, the fluctuations and the usage on it. So you have your app ID, which can be seen similar to like a username, and you have your secret, which can kind of be seen similar to your password. All right, you probably don't want to keep your secret wide open like this, like what I just did. But again, I'll show you in just a moment use cases of when you would actually want to use that as well. All right. So that was not the app ID that I had created for that particular application. I created one earlier when I put this demo together. And that app ID, I believe, if we take a look, that app ID started with N, so NH something or other. If we take a look at the settings and we go in here and take a look at that registered info, this is the app ID that I'm working with here.
And don't show this.
I'm not yet. Sorry.
It's a secret here.
It is a secret. So we have our redirect URIs, which is my machine name since I'm running the demo. And I also have it set to arcgis.github.io for those of you who would like to run along with it now. I don't know how, I'm not going to keep this up for a whole lot longer after this. But if you are running it from there, you should be able to access it from there as well. All right, guys. Thank you for sticking with me on that one. I know sometimes going through all that can be, I wouldn't say painful, but it's a lot of information. All righty. So I just kind of gave you a lot of info, kind of, you know, similar to drinking through the fire hose, which I'm sure probably some of you guys maybe already be familiar with some of the things that you've been listening to this week. But we always have the documentation for it, right? So if you are interested in any of this stuff, basically just go to the developer site, go to documentation. It's going to be actually very close to where that web map spec was, right up here. Security and authentication. Okay. All right. I don't want to I know we're running low, so and this is important stuff. So I'm going to have Bjorn talk a little bit about accessing credit-based services.
So just real quick, the same way we used it to connect to items, you can also use it to connect those items that are credit-based services, whether those are batch geocoding, the analysis capabilities we talked about before. And you can make that for your application so that your users don't have to log in. And you take that, the person creating the application or the organization behind that handles all this, takes care of the credit aspect of it. If you're not letting your users log in, but you are taking care of those credentials, there's two main ways to do it. One is to use a hosted proxy that is part of the ArcGIS Online. Another one is to do using your own proxy. And Esri provides actually 3 different proxies. We usually refer to them as resource proxies. And we have them in three flavors: .NET, PHP, and Java.
So I'm going to show you very quickly. Again, this is something where, let's say you have a web application. My specific demo, I'm working with the route task. So I have an application which requires some routing. Maybe you don't know who's going to be accessing your application. You don't have a user, a named user. So kind of backtrack a little bit. There's two different ways of when working with OAuth. You have a named user approach, which is what I just showed you by actually typing in a user within your organization, or you can have the application approach, which is what I'm going to show you here. That's when you're not quite sure who exactly is going to be accessing this. Maybe you've got, in this case, we're going to be working with some a route service. It requires credits, but you don't want to have to worry, but your users don't need to worry about that. So you're going to foot the bill for those credits, and you're going to have your application handle those credentials for you. So in this particular case, what I have done was I've created a very, very simple routing application. And what I want you, this is the thing I want you to take note of right here. All right, this looks a little different for any of you guys that have used routing and know what this URL looks like. This is not what the URL typically looks like. This is one that I've created through ArcGIS Online. You can do it through ArcGIS Online. You can also do it through the developer help. Basically what I did was I created a new item. I referenced the route task. I saved, it recognized that it was locked down. So it asked me if I wanted to save my credentials. I said yes. Once I saved the credentials for that route task within that item, it then created and generated a new URL to this route task. So I'm able to go ahead, copy that new URL, use that here, and what you should see is typically if I was using just the standard route task URL, I would automatically get prompted with the Identity Manager dialog asking me for my credentials. I did not get that this time. All right, so the application itself is handling that for you. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is by having an actual proxy file. So Bjorn mentioned the resource proxy. Some of you may be familiar with that already. We host that out on our GitHub site. But basically what you could do is within that resource proxy, we have a configuration file. You can set your configuration file to point to your URL, to your route task, and in this case, our traffic, because they're kind of tied together, and then our client ID, and then that secret, all right? So this is where having your proxy file, needing it to be secured on your machine is really important because that client ID and that secret are together. This is where I say you don't want to just kind of, the secret is a secret, right? If that's your username and your password, you're going to want to keep that secure. So the code for this one is a little bit different. Basically, all I'm doing is instead of using that URL that I had before, I'm using the standard URL that points to our route service. But I'm also now passing in a proxy rule. I'm telling it, hey, when you hit this route.arcgis.com, I want you now instead to proxy that through this header Esri, my proxy PHP file that I have on my machine. Goes through that file, it sees what I have stored within that config file, and it says, okay, it's all right, let him have it. So if I run this, oh, I still had that open in there from before. Let me get a different one in here. There we go. There we go. If I run this, you should see again, I don't get prompted. Your application handles that for you, okay? This is a really common request. We get this a lot. So again, a couple different ways. Save that within the actual, save your credentials within service, within your portal or ArcGIS Online, and then just use it that way, or use your proxy URL for your own proxy.
That's all you need to know. It's pretty straightforward, right? Firefox. We talked about how to secure data and how to access secure data, how to access secure web maps and web scenes. and applications. And we also talked in the end about using proxies, either a resource proxy on your own machine or the cloud-hosted proxy from ArcGIS Online to access private services. Do we have any questions?
Did we scare anybody from wanting to use this?
Far left, my left. The question is, what if you want to burn the user's question instead of your own credits? The answer is, then you have the user log in.
Yeah. So you would use that other approach. So if you want to, so instead you're saying, I don't want to burn my own credits. I want my users to have to foot the bill. This is where you would go in here and use, not that one, you would want to use this scenario. Okay, so basically you would have them, you would prompt them to log in with their credentials, and you would need to know, you're not giving any secret, but you need to know that app ID. We do have a sample on our in our developer help that shows you how you can go about doing that. If you go to the sample code and go to other, and then go to access ArcGIS online items via OAuth, you should be able to see how that works. And that actually, I think that, I'm not sure if that uses a pop-up or not. It may or may not.
Next question. All right. Black t-shirt.
Any more sessions on the proxy in more detail here that you're aware of?
The question is there any more sessions about the proxy? The answer is no, right?
I don't believe so. I know they used to do one. The support team used to do one. The people that primarily are responsible for the proxy are senior level support analysts. It was a question that came about. I don't know if you guys were around a few years ago when we had Silverlight Flex and JavaScript, and we had like 500 proxies floating around on the web, and no one knew exactly what they should be using, how they should work. We finally were like, we have to get something common put in place so that it can be used across the board in a few different languages. So that's where this resource proxy came from. It was one of those things where we had some really, really talented people that were willing to take on the job and in support. So a lot of those guys, if you have some really specific questions, this guy here knows some as well because he's gone into the repo and done some updates on some things. And we also have a few in the support that handle it as well.
Okay. Yeah. The showcase there is open to 4, and that's probably the best place to answer those.
Oh, yeah.
If you like this, don't forget to give us feedback.
And if you don't, please be kind anyways.
All right. We'll take questions up here now for those of you who are too shy to ask them in public. Thank you, everybody.